We have a guest with us this evening. I met Ronny, it's been almost 20 years ago, when we were taking a tour to Israel. And I've been in and out of Israel a lot, but Ronny and another friend of ours now, Ilan, were the guides for the tour. That time we had two buses, and they picked, as we walked towards them, they just said, "I'll take that one," and Ronny looked at me. Actually, the other guy looked at my brother and said, "He looks friendlier." So he took him, and Ronny got stuck with me. And he has become a trusted friend. We have traveled a lot of road together. I'll tell you one story, and then I'll introduce Ronny. A few years ago, wasn't too many years ago, we were in Israel for the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall. And I was there with a small group of people, and we had made it to Jerusalem. And I was scheduled to speak at a Russian church that evening. So I turned the shower on, was about to step in the shower, and my phone started ringing. And really, it was unusual that I would have picked it up in that circumstance, but I did, and my mom was on the phone. My parents were just flying into the country. We had gone ahead of them. And there was a lot of noise. She said, "I'm in an ambulance. Your dad collapsed at the airport." And they had to get a defibrillator. And she said, "I'm in the ambulance. The EMT gave me his phone. I don't know where I'm at, and I don't know where I'm going." And that was a Friday evening, which in Jerusalem is the Sabbath, Shabbat, and everything in Jerusalem closes. Everything closes. It's like Sunday used to be here. Some of you are old enough to remember Sundays, when Sundays everything closed. And I didn't know where she was or where they were going or which hospital, and I called Ronny. And I said, "Ronny, I just got a call. My dad's in an ambulance headed to a hospital, and I don't know where." And he said, "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. We'll find him." And it wasn't 20 minutes, and he pulled up in front of the hotel, and he drives and works his phone and delivers me to the hospital where my parents are. So when I say we've done, amen, yay to God. When I say we've done a little bit of life together, we've done more than eat ice cream. We've eaten a lot of ice cream and shared a lot of coffee. But we've walked down some other roads too. He served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. He was a lieutenant colonel when he finished that career. But he is a historian of note. I've had the privilege of studying at some excellent schools, Vanderbilt University, Hebrew University, and I've studied history in those places, and Middle Eastern history and ancient Near Eastern history. And I haven't in any of those places found a professor that had a better grasp of the history of Israel and the Middle East than Ronny does. So if you've been coming in the morning seminars, your head is full of dates and facts and information. In fact, tomorrow morning from 9 to 11, he'll do the third in the series of this week. But we are honored. It's the first time he's been here since COVID started. And I think it's the first time you've been out of Israel since COVID started. So if you will, help me welcome back to WOC, Ronny Simone. Good to see you. Thank you. Ronny played volleyball for the Israeli team once upon a time. So we have this tradition when he comes to Tennessee to visit, we usually organize a basketball game. That started several birthdays ago. And this year I forgot to tell him to bring his shoes, so we didn't have to play. But welcome back to Tennessee, Colonel.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me.
Our objective tonight, he's doing history in the mornings. So we're going to see if we can take the time we've got tonight and understand a little bit more about what's happening in Israel and the Middle East these days. I think it's safe to say that we don't imagine that our media gives us the full picture. Be nice, we have a guest. And it's impossible in a 3-minute soundbite to give us the full picture of what's happening there. But I think Ronny can help us with that. But first, tell us about this new academy you have started, the Galilee Academy. We can go to school without jet lag.
Something like that, yes. We had a year that was so surprising and unexpected, and everything came to a complete halt, not just in America and Israel as well. It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to get to do stuff that you just don't have the time to do in your normal daily life because it's so busy. I always wanted to teach about Israel, Israel's history. So we decided to put together a whole program. And the plan was to bring people over to the shores of the Sea of Galilee and spend 2 days in class and 1 day field trip and touring and just experience the land, not just in a tour, which is very nice, but you cannot go too profoundly into information. Now, we are realistic. We know it's not going to happen right now. So at least we have the whole academic program online. And people that would like to join and get immersed in knowing Israel from every aspect are most welcome to sign up and to do so. Just about another semester we're going to start. The third semester, over 72 lectures. If you like that kind of material, I think that you will enjoy what you'll find in the website.
So how do we find it?
No, it's www.thegalileeacademy.com. Very simple.
Very good. So you can go to school and not have to leave the country.
Which is a shame. You want to go to school on the shores of the lake, which is really, really much nicer. But time will come.
Amen. So tell us about COVID in Israel. What it was like 6 months ago and what it's like now.
Shall we start with the good news?
Yes.
Good news. 2 days ago, officially, all the restrictions were lifted up. We no longer have to wear masks indoors, outdoors. 30,000 people show up at a soccer game, basketball game. 50,000 people show up at a concert. It looks like we are back to, not back, I'm sorry. It looks like we are going forward. And yeah, that was something that we do lead the world in that regard, and it wasn't easy. So when we started, we had the big advantage because Israel is like an island. If you watch the one and only airport to come into the country, you can be better protected than other people. The problem was that just like in America, politics got involved, and we lost about 6,400 people to COVID. In a small country, that's not a small number. And part of it was simply incompetence and politicians not willing to do what was right just to keep a certain political structure. One example, if I may. The way the system works in my country, which is a parliamentary democracy, unlike in this country, the president is not the leader of the nation. He is a head figure. The power is in the hands of the prime minister. And you need to form a coalition. And in the coalition, for the last few decades, you always have the parties of the ultra-Orthodox. They don't trust the state, they do not believe in the state, but they are very important players, always the swing vote. You cannot form a government without them. And since it was Passover, and then the Feast of Tabernacles, tens of thousands of Orthodox Jews are coming from Brooklyn to Jerusalem. It's just part of the celebration. The problem was that Brooklyn was hit, especially those communities, more than all the others with COVID. And instead of closing the airport, we let them in. Because if we said you cannot come in, then the government will come to an end, because the ultra-Orthodox parties will leave the coalition. And we know for sure that thousands of Israelis died because of that decision. And we just had elections not that long ago, and some of you who are watching news from the region know that we have a new government as well, and that would be part of the reason. Part of the reason that politics had the upper hand, including compromising the lives and the safety of the nation. And that's wrong. It should not be like that. So 6 months ago, it wasn't that good. Today, as I said, countries are looking at us and try to figure out how did you do that. Well, it wasn't easy, and I was surprised because Israelis are not disciplined. If anything, we are rebels. But it looked like most people understood that we really have to cooperate and not trust in the government, but do what common sense dictates, and it worked. So,
thank God.
Yeah. So it looks like in Israel, it's almost totally behind us.
Yay, God. Let's go back a couple of months. Ramadan, and you had, in our news, we heard about riots in Jerusalem and trouble around the Temple Mount. And most of that holiday is, we're not too aware of. So maybe explain what happens around Ramadan and why all of that unrest, and how big a threat really was it to the stability of Jerusalem?
Well, Ramadan is a month in the Muslim calendar, and this is a month that is the most important one of the year. And for the average Muslim, it's not just a celebration, visit family, etc., and fasting for 30 days from sunrise to sunset. It's always time for some tension, some sentiments which are higher than usual, usually quite an aggressive one, especially when you live in the state of Israel, the Jewish homeland, as you all know. It's an opportunity to take those sentiments against the country, against the government, etc. And since we're not alone in the region, and Israeli Arabs, who are Israelis by all means, but mostly Muslims as well, are being instigated by our neighbors, which are the Palestinians, Hamas in Gaza, and the PLO in the West Bank. I hope that some of you know the map and know what I'm talking about. And therefore, Ramadan is a month of much religious zeal. It's a month that you know that you should expect some kind of trouble because that routine goes on every year. And COVID was part of what happened. And Hamas, which is on in a very bad condition recently, it was one way to score some points and to get the attention. Because for the last 10 years, when the Middle East is experiencing what is called the Arab Spring, most of the attention goes to Syria and goes to Iraq. The Palestinians were simply forgotten. And the one thing they do not want is to be forgotten. So how do you bring your agenda back to the world's table? You fire at Israel. And therefore, there was a combination of circumstances that led to a very unpleasant time. Israeli Arabs, I believe that most of them are loyal to the state and just want to live with us a way of life. They are citizens like anybody else. The only Arabs in the Middle East that live in peace, their property is respected, their lives are respected, are not the Arabs in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Kuwait. You go down the list. It's the Israeli Arabs. But every now and then there was an opportunity, especially for Ramadan. They want to show the discontent from the occupation, from Israel dominating the Palestinians. And when we had the celebration in Jerusalem's Day, and this is a national holiday, and there was a parade that goes through the city with Israeli flags, it makes some people upset. Would it make anybody upset in America if somebody will go with the American flag someplace in Washington, D.C.? I guess maybe it will make some people upset today, huh?
It would today.
Well, that's really a shame. And sometimes these parades are going through the Muslim neighborhoods. And Hamas said if that will happen, they're going to fire at Israel. And sure enough, as this procedure was going on, the siren goes off. And we were hit by about 10 rockets. None of them caused any damage. But that was the opening stage. And taking the advantage of this kind of what happened, local Arabs started marching in the streets as well, showing their discontent. And of course, the Jewish population responded. And there was a mini civil war, can you say that, for a day or two. The police was unprepared. It's all quiet. It's all going back now to what it used to be. But in a cycle of every 20, 25 years, when the tension kind of accumulating, and the imams are always behind the scene, instigating people in the mosques, it's time to go, and I kid you not, right? It's time to go and kill the Jews and take over the city and take over the country. Sometimes it comes to a climax, and there was a big eruption, and that's what happened about, what was it, 2 months ago? Yeah, May. It was actually the middle of May. So that was the story.
So we hear about all the rockets coming out of Gaza mostly. How big a threat does that pose to the general population?
No, it's not mostly, it's Gaza only. As far as we know, there are no rockets in the West Bank. There are in Lebanon, but Lebanon was not part of this one. And it's really hard to explain to people that don't know that kind of an experience. And it's amazing what people can get used to. We're used to that. We're used to that every now and then somebody is going to fire a rocket and they want to kill you and your family and children. The kids go to school and the siren goes off and they have 7 seconds to find shelter, otherwise they may be killed. So in the cities which are closer to the Gaza borders, almost like bus stops, every few feet you have a concrete cube. And this is a special shelters for people to just walk the streets, especially kids that go to school. And this time it was worse because since the last operation that we had in 2014, Hamas was able to re-equip themselves. Money is coming from Iran. And instead of helping the people and building hospitals and schools, they invest every penny in building rockets. And we know that. We did not stop them from doing that because if we initiate any kind of a preventive airstrike, the whole world will be against us. So you need to be clever sometimes the way you do things. And they were simply capable of building new weapons, things that we knew about, things that we did not know about. And sure enough, you put your helmet on and you're taking 4,000 rockets. Again, so this is something that happens every now and then, and we are prepared for that. The problem is our retaliation. And our retaliation is very, very careful, and we try very much not to cause any kind of a collateral damage, but hey, it's a war, and sometimes you have casualties even among innocent civilians. But the dilemmas are impossible. Since Hamas is based himself right in the heart of civilian areas, and you have a rocket launcher in the courtyard of a school, or you have a rocket launcher in the parking lot of a hospital, or a kindergarten, or the UNRWA facility, which is the United Nations Welfare Organization that sees over the refugees over there, the choices are very limited. Here is a little scenario, okay? You're flying your drone or whatever, and we have a very sophisticated equipment, and you see a rocket launcher, they're ready to fire. And it's standing in a kindergarten's parking lot. And we have good information. We know exactly who lives where and what building is for what. And you have 10 seconds to make a decision. Because if they are launching the rocket, your grandchild or your son may be dead because this rocket may fly directly at the kindergarten on our side. What would you do? Well, Israel did release some of the footage that we had over there, and the pilot is calling headquarters, then listen, I see some kids in the area, and this launcher is located in the kindergarten's courtyard, what shall I do? And the answer was disengage. Time after time, disengage, and they fired the rocket. I do not know what happened to that specific rocket, but you do understand the dilemmas. How do you deal with that? And how do you respond to that? And this is one of the things that we always are concerning with. And given the amount of fire that we used over the last operation, it's not only because people were killed, about 200 casualties, about 120 were terrorists, and we even know the names. You can't really hide. We know everything that happens in the Gaza area. That was not such a terrible price to pay. I know it's not unpleasant to speak about that, dead bodies, etc. But again, what are the options? What would America do if somebody would fire a rocket from Tijuana into San Diego? You will not ask questions, right? Who did what? The answer is clear. But what America can do, Israel cannot.
I think it's hard for us to understand because typically when we have been engaged in military conflict, it's been a long way away. And Israel's a tiny country, about the size of Middle Tennessee. So what he's describing would be like the enemy sworn to your destruction lives in Smyrna. I mean, you may feel that way about Smyrna, but it's not really true. If you live in Smyrna, I apologize, okay? But can you tell them the story when your son left home to go to college? Because you mentioned they have 7 minutes to get to a bomb shelter.
7 seconds.
7 seconds. And we don't live with that imagination. Can you tell them the instructions you gave him?
Yeah, well, it depends how far you are from the border. 7 seconds if your town is located right on the line with Gaza, all right? If Tel Aviv, for example, you have about 45 seconds. So the further you go, the longer time.
That's comforting, isn't it? A whole 45 seconds.
Yeah. And I will speak about the Iron Dome in just a minute. But yeah, my son went to college and he chose one which is close to Beersheba, which is within the range, and every now and then things happen. And we had the usual father and son talk before you send your child to college. And you speak about the usual stuff, beware of that and that and that. And I said, listen, if the siren goes off and there is a public bomb shelter about 50 yards from where you're going to stay, no way you can make it there in 15 seconds, all right? So I want to give you advice. Just wake up, roll under the bed, and pray. And the bed will be some kind of a shelter because you are not going to make it, waking up in the middle of the night, all confused. And yeah, this is just the instructions that we give our kids when they leave home. I know it's absolutely absurd, but listen, this is home. And this is the price to pay to be an Israeli. And we are proud and happy to pay the price. Where else can we go? I mean, so if this is it, it is what it is.
Since we're telling stories about your children, he has a son and 2 daughters.
Yes.
The story when your daughter was in the military and she ran out of food?
Yeah.
Can you? Maybe don't use the same words you used, but they'll get the idea.
It's always embarrassing, Pastor. Yeah, my daughter, she served at the Air Force in an F-16 squad, and she was one of those operational officers, something like that. I don't know the right terminology. And she has all kind of gluten problems and a little bit of stomach issues, so they gave her permission to be on a special diet. And she could go every 2 days and leave base and go to Beersheba, the nearest town, and buy whatever she needs because the army is not providing back then. Today, that was 10 years ago. And that was the agreement. And then she did something, and her commanding officer was upset with her, and he told her, you're not going today, you have to stay here. Now, at that time, I was called for reserve duty just outside the Gaza area. And it was something that we had to plan, and we worked with something that had to happen that night, and I was really busy. And my phone rings, and it's my daughter, and she's crying on the phone. I said, I'm hungry. Now, what do you mean you're hungry? And she tells me the story. And I thought, well, the country can wait, and the terrorists can wait, and Gaza can wait. My daughter is hungry. Your parents, all right? This is the last thing that you want to hear. And I tell her, well, let me talk to your commanding officer. Oh, he's not here, they're on a tour. Well, somebody is there, let me talk to them. And for the first time, I used my full rank and full name and my military number when I identify myself. I said, listen, I'm giving my permission. I don't know who you are, but my daughter has my permission to go to Beersheba. She's going to buy whatever. She'll be back in 3 hours. And if you dare to touch her. And then came some very unpleasant words in Hebrew. But the message was...
So she got something to eat.
She got some, well, she didn't call me again, so yes. Yes.
Yeah, God. All right, you mentioned the Iron Dome. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, in my view will surprise you, and you'll hear some frustration in my voice, and for a good reason. I think that some of you heard about the Iron Dome. It's a very sophisticated weapon system that was developed in a very short time after the Second Lebanese War. The US was engaged with finances. The technology is Israeli technology, and it was developed in a record time. Within 2 years, the whole system was operational and was working. And that can intercept low range and low flying surface-to-surface rockets, basically. Now, one of those rockets that we sent to intercept cost about $40,000, and the cheapest rocket that Hamas manufactures is about $200. So do understand that you need to be very careful how many of those you want to use. And for that reason, the radar, which is called Green Pine, is a very sophisticated system that within a tenth of a second, they can tell by the range and by the angle that the rocket leaves the launcher, which we can watch where it's going to land. If it's going to land in a populated area, we'll fire it down. If it's going to land in a non-populated area, just a waste of money, we'll let it fall. And they scored about 90% of success. And again, there was nothing, it's second to none in the world. The world doesn't have such a weapon system. The US developed the Nautilus, which is similar, but the Nautilus cannot work in rainy days. It cannot see through clouds. The Iron Dome, it's not just that, it's not a dumb rocket that kind of hits you. It will go after you. It will find a way to go after the rocket until they hit him. Now here's the problem. The problem is that it's a defensive weapon system, which means that we don't have to retaliate because no damage was done. I mean, rockets were fired, we intercepted them, no damage was done, there's no urgency. Now, if we did not have the Iron Dome and Israelis were killed, our retaliation will be much more effective. It will move into Gaza, and that will save lives on both sides, by the way. So Hamas in Gaza has to thank us for the Iron Dome because it protects Gaza more than protecting us. So the Iron Dome is a good system. But Israel was known to be very offensive and aggressive in that regard. There is a problem, we move in, we take care about business, we move out. Now, it's changing the strategy, it's changing the spirit. There's no urgency to move in because we are protected, and since we are not taking that many casualties, why respond? Now, the mindset of Hamas says that if we launch the rockets, it's a victory for itself. They think that their rockets are hitting Tel Aviv because that's what they're being told. So it's not that no damage happened. The fact that you're able to launch those, it's kind of a little victory. So from the Israeli side, and this is something that bothers me in person, but again, I'm away from decision-making, never was anymore, but it shows a different kind of a mentality that we're willing to be more defensive. And it's not a good sign, not a good sign. Because if there was no Iron Dome, I think that we were much more efficient to retaliate against Gaza. And yes, more casualties will maybe take place, but it will be one at a time, and it will be done with it. And now, every few years, we have another round, and few people get killed, and another round. We could have ended that years ago, but there was no determination. And the Iron Dome is kind of a two-edged sword, can you say that? It's really defending. On the other hand, it doesn't give you any motivation to do what needs to be done, because the damage is limited and the casualties are limited. But the mindset in Israel is more defensive. Look at Iran, for example. Right? The whole idea of the arrow, another weapon system that can intercept ballistic missiles. It's a defensive weapon system. All right? And defense, you don't win by defense. Usually, not soccer, not basketball, and not anything. I mean, in order to get there, you have to go and stick your flag in the bunker and just win that struggle. And for some reason, the Israeli mindset is changing a little bit, and it's not a good sign. Not a good sign. Just an opinion, okay? Just an opinion. Take it or leave it.
You know, it's a lesson when I visit Israel that I always come home with, the sacrifice the Israelis have made to occupy that, to reclaim their land and to defend their land. It's not a passive thing. And when you're there, you feel that. All the young people serve in the military, which means everybody you meet has served in their military and made the sacrifices that are invested with that. And they have a great diversity of opinion. They are as divided in opinion as we are here.
Yes, we are.
But they share that. And when I come home and I talk to Christians, typically here we have a much more passive response. You know, we wouldn't think of offending someone, let alone being assertive with our opinions. And I think the question we're having to ask right now is, how's that worked for us? How well has that worked for us? And I would submit to you that one of the lessons from COVID is we're going to have to be more assertive. Not more angry, not more belligerent, not more critical. But we have a heritage here. And it is as much our right to that heritage as anyone else's. And we're going to have to wake up. But that lesson is rekindled in me every time I have a privilege of visiting Israel and my friends there. The Abraham Accords. That's a pretty historic set of agreements, I think.
It is.
Certainly in modern day Israel, to have any type of an agreement with those nations. What nations are involved?
Well, the United Arab Emirates, some talks with Sudan that did not materialize yet. They say that something is cooking under the surface with Saudi Arabia, which I have no idea to what level it's going to surface. But it's a good thing. It's a whole new approach. And again, it's not that they like us all of a sudden. I think that what brings those people closer to Israel is understanding that they cannot face Iran on their own. I mean, if it wasn't for the Iranian domination in the area, I know we speak about the nuclear deal, but this is not that important right now, because that simply turns our attention to the other direction. What happens on the ground every day, Iran is getting more powerful, Iran is getting more influence in the region. They dominate Baghdad and Damascus and Sana'a in Yemen. And the Iranians are going to accomplish a goal, and that's to create what they call the Shiite Crescent, the whole region. And the world is busy with the nuclear program. That's not the main problem right now. It's the progress they are making on the ground. And the first enemy as a Shiite Muslim power are the Sunni Muslim powers. I'm not going there, so please don't ask me. But this will be the two main groups. And for that reason, the Sunni countries that understand that Iran is too powerful, they need us in a way to protect them. They will not say it loud and clear, but I'm telling you. All right? And therefore, countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates who almost border with Iran on the other side of the Persian Gulf, they understand that the threat that Iran is placing is too big, is too real, and they have to form coalitions. Otherwise, in a way, they are doomed. So it's not that suddenly there is a big love and affection, but if it was not for the real efforts of the Trump administration, maybe it would have not happened. And therefore, a few things had to come together. So again, it's a good thing. There were some other issues that only surfaced after the Accords were signed. For example, supplying them with F-35s that nobody knew about it when the Accords were signed, but it was a condition over there. And for them to present their decision to the Arab world that not everyone was happy is that Israel made a commitment not to annex Judea and Samaria, the territories, in return for making peace. Is that the case, yes or no? Well, nobody said it loud and clear, but it was a trade-off. So what they got in return was sophisticated weapons from the US of A, and an Israeli commitment not to move forward in annexing Judea and Samaria, or not to do anything on that level. But it's a blessing. And so far what we got from them more than any other thing is COVID, because to show some goodwill, Israelis were encouraged to go and visit Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and tens of thousands of people went. But as they went, they came back and brought COVID from the United Arab Emirates, and they just pushed everything a little back. But again, the last event with Gaza, Israeli businessmen reported that they are not that welcome anymore in the United Arab Emirates. So that was always a question. If there will be another round of violence vis-a-vis any Arab country, what will be the response of the United Arab Emirates? They have to show Arab solidarity, number one. They need to deal with their people, all right? And when Israel is attacking Gaza, keep the peace as it used to be, the masses will not like it, and that may jeopardize the whole stability. Because speak about countries that the regime, very few in number, and they only control the masses if the masses are content. And if the regime is supporting Israel, when Israel is at some kind of a struggle against another Arab entity, expect unrest in the streets of Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and Dubai and all the others. It's politics, and we don't understand how it works.
That's an important point. It's not easy to grasp. We're watching it begin to happen here, the division of our nation in these subsets, which makes it much more difficult for us to work together. But in the Middle East, the lines on the map that define the nations were drawn by people that didn't live in the Middle East. And they didn't take into consideration the connections amongst the people there, the ethnic connections, the tribal connections, and so in most of those countries, the rulers or the leaders represent a tiny percentage of the people. Syria is a real simple example. They've had a civil war.
Yeah.
And Assad, give them the demographics of Syria.
Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Qatar, for example, even Saudi Arabia. We speak about a small minority. That power was given to them by the victors of WW1. See how far away we go. I mean, the victors of the war, the British and the French, when they created those entities based on European Christian principles without asking the locals what do they want, when they decided to pull out and to give power, they have to give power not to the whole people, but to choose who is more trustworthy. Because if you give power to people in the Middle Eastern mindset, which is more clan-oriented, every clan wants to dominate all the others. So democracy in the Middle East means basically a civil war. It speaks about rights all the time because those clans are not accepting anybody's authority, they'll go to war. For that reason, to establish a country, it has to be a dictatorship. People will cooperate because they fear the regime. They have nothing in common with the clan that lives next door. They fight for the same springs of water. They fight for grazing grounds from biblical days. So the only way that these tribes will cooperate is fearing the regime. It had to be a dictatorship. And therefore the dictatorship usually is made of a minority that has all the power in their hands, and they control everything with an iron fist. Otherwise, it's not working. Iraq is a good example. Bringing democracy to Iraq was not the best of ideas, right? So just an example how it works in the Middle East. In Syria, there was a group called the Alawites. The Alawites are making about 10% to 15% of the population. But this was a group that when France pulled out from Syria in 1946, they chose them to give them power. So we have a very small group over there that has all the power, financially, the military, the secret service, everything is serving the regime. They don't care about the people. They serve the regime to protect the regime. So they're called Alawites, and they are a form of kind of a Shia Islam. But that's basically the problem, protecting the regime with all costs. So Syria today, after 10 years of a civil war, losing about 1 million people, just in Syria, And 35% of Syrians are dislocated. They had to leave their homes. Russia was bombing hospitals in Damascus. Nobody protested against Russia. It was okay. It's just Arabs in Syria. When we injure a Palestinian in Gaza, the whole world is in uproar. Yes, you hear some frustration in my voice. So Syria is a good example, how a small minority is dominating a big majority, and they won't give up. Now, even if Assad himself wanted to get on a plane and leave, as the president of Tunisia and some of the others, if Assad is leaving, there will be a brutal massacre of the Sunnis murdering the Alawites. It was an open issue over there, forgive me for getting a little too long, but in 1982, the father of Bashar, his name was Hafiz, the lion, all right, Hafiz al-Assad, Assad is the lion, I'm sorry, sent his army into the city of Hama, and you Google the massacre of Hama, 1982. That was the hub of the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, and they butchered more than 25,000 people. The riots in Syria today are the sons and daughters of those slain Muslim Brotherhood. It's payback time for them. All right? So if the Alawites are going to relinquish their power, there will be widespread massacre of the Alawites in Syria. That's how things are dealt with in the Middle East. You don't negotiate, you don't shake hands, you want it all. Usually you get nothing if you want it all. But that's how it works.
And I think it's safe to say that the most unifying feature of all of those nations you're talking about is a hatred of the Jewish people being in the land of Israel. Is that fair?
It's not only fair, again, if somebody like me will make that comment, I'm not objective, I'm biased.
No, that's why I made it, so you don't have to. But we need to rethink anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a fancy word for hating the Jewish people. And we tend to think that anti-Semitism ended with World War II when the Nazis were defeated in Europe. But the reality, anti-Semitism is very much a powerful force in the world today, because it's the hatred of the Jewish people that binds those people together that we've been talking about, more than their loyalty to the nation in which they live, or the capital city, or the government that has authority over them. When he talks about the Arabs on the street, or the Muslims on the street, is a more accurate statement, the Muslims on the street, the one principle that they can mobilize around is hatred of the Jews being in the land of Israel. And so it's the reason that when anytime the global press or the United Nations or whomever can accuse the Israelis, it gets a disproportionate response. And what you need to understand is behind that is the hatred of the Jewish people. It's such an important principle, and it's lost in the media's presentation typically. Is that close?
Yes, let me add something to that. My point was that there is a very, very clear agenda, and we have to give credit to the Arab Muslim side. They don't hide their intention. They say it loud and clear all the time, in any language that you choose. We just refuse not to pay attention. So don't listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what they're saying, all right? And it has to be understood. And here is an observation which is not speculation and not a biased one. The Arab Muslim mindset will never, ever accept the fact that the Jews have a homeland in the very heart of the Middle East. They can't take it. The fact that the Jews have a state is an offense to Islam. Now, again, don't listen to me. Listen to the messages in the mosques by the imams every Friday. Listen to speakers of parliaments. Listen to presidents. The Muslim mindset will never tolerate a Jewish homeland in the very heart of the Middle East. And once you understand that, and you understand that the motivation is basically not political but religious, it looks like a dead end. Now, I don't have access to every single Muslim in the region to ask him, sir, ma'am, what do you think? I have to rely on what I hear from the leadership. But there is a way. What about people voting freely in elections? It only happened twice in the Middle East. It happened among the Palestinians in January 2006, free elections. The whole world came to monitor to see that the procedure is by democratic standards. It happened in Egypt, 2011. In both cases, who won the elections big time? The Muslim Brotherhood, 70 to 75% of the vote. And the Muslim Brotherhood basically is, let's put it this way,
A terrorist organization?
well, not just terrorists, let me put it this way, okay? Muhammad al-Banna, the founder, after he read Hitler's Mein Kampf, he founded the Muslim Brotherhood, all right? So Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood Palestine. And once you understand that kind of mindset, and the fact that Islam cannot, they simply cannot, because admitting that the Jews are victorious and prosperous, Islam doesn't teach humiliation. And the Arabs are humiliated by the existence of the Jewish state. You cannot call yourself a Muslim at the very same time to accept the fact that the Jews have a homeland in what Islam considers to be sacred land to Islam. So as long as the debate was political, we had some hope that maybe politics will negotiate, will find a way. But it was never really political. And now it's openly on the table. Hamas's agenda is, and go and read the charter of Hamas, especially Articles 13 and 28. They tell you exactly what they mean, and they don't just write it, right? They say, no negotiations, we have the right, and we will destroy the Jewish state. 75% of Palestinians think like that.
Hamas is in Gaza. Who's on the northern border with where Lebanon and Syria
The northern
are?
border is Hezbollah, and the PLO is in Judea and Samaria.
So how many Muslims are there in the Middle East and North Africa, approximately?
Total number in the world, about 1.5 billion. Now, not all of them are militants, and not all of them will have that radical agenda. But it's fair to say that between 20 to 30%, that's more than the USA's population who are willing to do something and to do something violent.
So how many Jews are in Israel?
Close to 9 million, not Jews. Israelis, 75% are Jews, so about 7 million or so.
About 7 million Jews.
Yeah.
Several hundred million people around you.
Yeah.
Not too happy you're there.
It's a great neighborhood to live in. It's a good neighborhood. No.
But in spite of that, I visited Israel the first time. My parents took my brother and Philip and I. I was in the 6th grade and he was in the 2nd. And your primary agricultural product was oranges. They were really good oranges, but that was pretty much what you grew. Jaffa oranges were famous all over the world. Today, give us an overview of pre-COVID of the Israel economy and your contributions to what's happening in the world. What's happened in that tiny little country, outnumbered in that way, is inexplicable apart from the sacrificial hard work of the people and the help of God. So can you tell them a little about Israel today?
Yes, I will. When you look at the map of the Middle East, you see that tiny dot, tiny speck over there, a place of tranquility, a place of prosperity, a place which is strong, and we can protect ourselves. I know that the whole message sounds a little, okay, what are you going to do? We know how the book ends. We are strong enough to protect ourselves, and we are going to win this. We're winning all the time, all right? But just to think that under the pressure of the money that we are using for the armed forces, close to 25%, the US of A, maybe about 10 or 11, enormous amount of money. And we're able to build and to pave and to create and to invest. Israel is leading the world today in agriculture. You all heard about drip irrigation. The produce goes to every corner of the world. It's the best of the best. And those of you that have been to Israel always enjoyed it so much to watch people going into the dining room in the hotel, the first breakfast. And they just stop in awe because the buffet is going from wall to wall. And you have everything that the land was blessed with, and it's absolutely amazing. We don't import that much food because we know how to grow it in a desert, That's number one.
But there's no bacon.
There's no bacon, and well, some hotels you do. And if you ask for a cheeseburger in McDonald's, they're kosher, and no pepperoni on your pizza unless you know where to go. So come to me, I'll show you where can you get pepperoni on your pizza. Now, that was something the Russian Jews brought with them, so the country is not as kosher as it used to be, thanks to the Russians, with all their delis and all that. But telecommunication. I mean, we speak about a lot of firms. Intel has the largest plant in the world, in Israel, and they're building one now to double the one that we have already. So we speak about human skills that we invest in them. We speak about education. We speak about making a contribution. And countries are coming to learn how to do it right in the medical world, and especially in farming and in high-tech of every kind. I'm not high-tech myself, but even the chip for the first cell phone was manufactured in Israel, okay? So this is a little contribution to the world as well. And all that is done under the pressure that these great minds and brains every now and then have to put the uniforms on and go to protect their country for a month or two. Just imagine how much more anybody could have achieved if you can dedicate all the money for the well-being of the people, for education and industry, etc. So all things considered, we're doing quite well, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important lesson for us. You know, in our imagination, you can only flourish if all of your adversaries are vanquished and everything is at peace, and you can orient your life without having to be distracted by the things that seem like opposition or intrusions. But the lesson seems to be just the opposite. That while you have to give attention to all of those things, it's still possible for God to do remarkable things in and through your lives. So we've got to recalibrate a little bit. I don't think we will ever see a time when there isn't opposition to the worldview you hold because you embrace the Scripture as the Word of God. But in spite of the opposition, God can bring blessings and establish you, even though there's not universal acceptance of the worldview you hold. Amen. I'll say it for you. It's okay. All right, our time's about up. What if you're part of the family, whether you know it or not? Once you've been here, we pray for you. What would you like us to know about Israel today? And if you were going to give a presentation about Israel to a group of Americans, what do you want us to know about Israel and the people there?
And we're about to finish this, huh?
Yeah, you've only got an hour.
When I come to the US, and I do that for many years, I was shocked at first because I thought I'm going to bring some stories from Israel and people are going to listen. And I was shocked to see how much support we have, especially among evangelical Americans. In my country, people don't know that. And therefore, I thought to myself that it's more important for me not just to bring a message over here, but going back home to tell my own people that we're not alone. Because sometimes you can have that impression. That impression can be devastating because you listen to what leaders around the world are saying, and they're saying messages. I understand politics sometimes, but you don't get to know the feel of the people, and you complain about your liberal media. Well, we can teach you some liberalisms in our media as well. And therefore, the one thing I'd like to know, or to let you know, is that with all the struggles that we are facing, and we just have a new government, a new prime minister, something that we never had before, and Israel may be a secular country, so to speak, because not everybody is practicing the Jewish faith as our ancestors used to, but we all know why we are there. And we are there because God keeps His promises. And we do have that kind of zeal within us, although I don't wear a yarmulke, and I'm not dressed in black as some of my ultra-Orthodox brothers. The term religious and secular is a little tricky to understand the Israeli mindset. And for somebody like myself and my whole generation, and I hope that I was able to pass that on to my children, time will tell, because we have a mission. And the mission is to pass on that kind of zeal, because if we lose that, in the Middle East, it's a very tough neighborhood. And for somebody like myself to be able to say, I live in a generation that God chose to keep His promise to His people and bring us back to live as a free nation, it's awesome. I don't take it for granted. And therefore, because my parents could not say that, and their parents were killed in the Holocaust, and 85 generations of Jews cannot say what I can say today, and that's the message. We live as free people in our country because God chose to keep His promise in my generation. It's awesome.
So one last question and then we'll pray. When COVID is banished and there are some protocols in place, is it safe for frightened Americans to visit Israel?
Well, I think that many of you have been there. Many have been there, and I'm sure that you came back home and it was a good experience, and you shared that with your friends and family, and you can make a difference. Because if I come to this place and I tell you how safe and great it is, oh yeah, sure, you want us to come because we bring money, prosperity, etc. Well, of course I want you to come because that's how we make a living. But again, the way to convince Americans that it's safe to go is people that have been there, to go back home and share the story with family and co-workers and friends, and each one of you can make a difference. So the answer is absolutely yes. Sometimes we have some tension in places, so we know where not to go, but that may last for a day or two. Seriously, I cannot think about a single place in Jerusalem to advise people, don't go because it's dangerous. I'm sure that you have some places, maybe downtown Nashville, you advise people, don't go there, it's not safe. I can't think about a single place in Israel, in Jerusalem, that I will tell you not to go to. And it's amazing how friendly people are. And people always tell me, we feel so welcome, and we feel so safe. Exactly. My problem is that Jerusalem is only making the headlines when things are not good in Jerusalem. What kind of a news bulletin will start with, dun, 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 dun. It was a quiet day in Jerusalem today, ladies and gentlemen. So it's only when something happens, and that creates a certain mindset. Jerusalem equals danger. Nonsense. If you come to Jerusalem, number one, you feel home. And in a way, you will be home. Spiritual home. Where else can you go on this planet to feel really home where the Christian roots are coming from?
Just for the sake of full disclosure, if you go to Jerusalem on a tour with me, there's some places in the city I'll tell you not to go. He's more courageous than I am. But I can also, I'll tell you this, I'm far more comfortable walking the streets of the old city of Jerusalem today than I would be in Chicago or Baltimore or a host of other cities in our nation. And that should not be. God help us. Well, thank you for coming back to see us, Colonel.
It was a pleasure.
We're going to come see you.
Thank you for coming.
I want to close with a prayer. You give him a hand. He deserves it. It's really impossible, I think, for the average American to understand the degree to which the Israelis or the Jewish world in general don't trust the Christians. For the most part, we're completely oblivious to that. Typically, they're more comfortable with the Muslim world than they are the Christian world, because the Christian world has killed far more of the Jewish people than the Muslim world ever has. And while we don't know that history very well, I assure you the Jewish people do. Is that fair? But I'm grateful to say in the last decade or so, that has begun to change a bit. And it's to a great extent because of people like you that have invested the effort to learn a bit and to overcome some of the things you weren't told. And your willingness to go and be a friend to the people, treat the people with respect when you visit the country. It is changing. And I believe we will see it continue to change. We're committed to that. But if there is a lesson, I think tonight, as we close, it's impossible to think about our friends in Israel and not realize that God keeps his promises. And if he'll keep them in Jerusalem, he'll keep them in Tennessee. And our lives are dependent upon that, and our future is dependent upon that just as much as our Jewish brothers and sisters are dependent upon that. The good news is there's really no separation any longer. We stand together. Okay? Father, I thank you. I thank you for the reminder that you're moving in the earth. That in spite of hatred and opposition and the many things that divide us, that you're a covenant-keeping God, that you watch over your promises and watch over your word to fulfill it. And I pray that the knowledge of God would grow and increase in the earth, that we will one day truly see the lion lay down with the lamb. We praise you for it. Lord, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, not just an absence of conflict, but peace with you. We thank you for it. And I pray you'll give Ronny safe travels. Keep him strong until we can visit him again in the city of Jerusalem. In Jesus' name, amen.